The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed like a lantern against the crisp autumn night, its broad steps alive with the shuffle of polished shoes and the rustle of gowns. Limousines lined Fifth Avenue, doors opening and closing in rhythm as drivers tipped their caps and guests adjusted their tuxedos. New York's social season was at its height, and tonight's gala promised both spectacle and influence. Under the towering columns and golden light, the city's most powerful gathered to sip champagne, offer toasts, and remind one another that they belonged. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers cast a warm sheen over marble floors. A jazz quartet played something smooth and unhurried. Waiters moved quietly between groups, balancing silver trays heavy with drinks. A nod, a folded bill slipped into a pocket, or a murmured, "Thank you, sir," completed each exchange. The rhythm of wealth and courtesy was so practiced that even silence seemed expensive. The air smelled faintly of roses from the elaborate centerpieces and of old stone, as though the museum itself leaned in to listen. Emily Carter stood at the threshold, her simple black dress brushing against the floor. She had borrowed the shoes, polished them carefully, though one heel still wobbled slightly. Around her, women floated past in gowns, stitched with sequins that glittered like constellations, their laughter mingling with the music. She inhaled and exhaled slowly. The invitation in her hand crinkled from how tightly she gripped it. For a moment, she remembered her mother's kitchen table, the worn wood, the chipped mug of tea, and the voice that had encouraged her before she left home. "Walk in with your head high, darling. You belong anywhere dignity leads you." It was those words she carried with her now, more than the fabric of her dress or the ticket in her palm. She stepped forward. At the far end of the hall, Victoria Ashford lifted her champagne glass and tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. She leaned toward her husband, Richard, whose attention was half on his buzzing phone. "Look at her," Victoria murmured, her lips curling. Someone must have wandered in from the wrong door. Richard barely looked up. He had spent weeks preparing for tomorrow morning's meeting with Michael Carter, a deal that could rescue his company from the brink. "Ignore it," he said absently, scrolling through messages. But Victoria's eyes remained fixed on the young woman in black. Michael Carter himself had arrived just minutes earlier, his stride purposeful, his phone pressed to his ear. A man accustomed to rooms falling silent when he entered. He had grown used to scanning a space without truly seeing anyone in it. Tonight was no different. He paused only to shake hands with the senator, murmur something to the museum director, and move toward the auction tables. Conversations bent around him, respectful nods following his path. From across the hall, he did not notice the figure of Emily, still standing at the edge, summoning her courage. Emily approached the entrance guard, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. She handed him her invitation with both hands, careful to appear confident. He glanced at it, scanned the barcode, and then nodded. "Enjoy your evening, miss," he said, stepping aside. Relief loosened Emily's chest. She had made it through the first door, but 3 steps into the hall, the air shifted. A voice, smooth and sharp, cut across the murmur of conversation. "Wait, what's this?" Victoria Ashford had stepped forward, her gown trailing behind like a crimson wave. With practiced grace, she plucked the invitation from Emily's hand. Holding it aloft as though it were evidence, she announced, "Does this look real to you?" The surrounding guests turned their heads, curiosity gleaming in their eyes. For some, it was simple entertainment. For others, it was an unspoken test. Who belonged and who did not. Emily's throat tightened, but she steadied her voice. "That's my invitation," she said, her tone soft yet clear. She extended her hand, waiting. Victoria did not return it. Instead, with a small, disdainful smile, she tore the ticket in half. The sound echoed across the marble like a snapped branch. Guests gasped. A woman in emerald sequins pressed her fingers to her mouth. A man in a bow tie muttered, "Oh dear." Others chuckled, eager for the drama. Emily froze. Her heart pounded, heat rising to her cheeks. She forced herself not to look away. The torn halves drifted toward the floor, scattering like dry leaves. All around, the crowd swelled with murmurs. From the corner of her vision, Emily saw Camilla Ashford, phone already in hand, her smile bright for the tiny glowing screen. "This will be good," she whispered, angling the camera. Preston, her brother, raised his phone too, whispering with glee, "Peak delusion! She thinks she belongs here." He grinned at the lens, already tasting the thrill of instant fame. The orchestra played on, but the music no longer mattered. The spectacle had shifted to the girl in black. Emily bent slowly, gathering the fragments of her ticket. Her hair fell forward, shielding her face, but her movements were deliberate. Piece by piece, she collected what had been torn from her. Somewhere in the back of the hall, Michael Carter lifted a glass of water and listened to his assistant's low voice reciting figures. He was focused on numbers, not people. If his gaze had shifted just a few feet, he might have seen her, the daughter he had never acknowledged, kneeling on marble as laughter rippled above her. Victoria turned to the nearest guests, raising her glass once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with mock concern, "sometimes these events attract unexpected guests. But don't worry, security will handle it." A few chuckled, others clapped lightly, treating it like theater. Emily straightened, clutching the torn halves. Her breath shook, but her eyes were calm. She thought again of her mother's voice, steady as the ticking of their old clock. Dignity is not in what they see, it's in what you hold inside. She held her head high. Phones lifted, cameras flashed. Emily stood frozen in the center of the glittering hall. The torn halves of the invitation trembled in Emily's hand, but the echo of ripping paper lingered louder than the quartet's saxophone. The marble hall, so carefully arranged for elegance and prestige, had shifted into something colder. Murmurs crawled along the edges of the crowd, curious whispers turning sharp. Some guests laughed behind champagne glasses. Others leaned forward as though settling in for a performance. Victoria Ashford relished the attention. She tilted her head, her red silk gown flowing like a banner, her voice pitched to carry. "This is exactly what I feared," she declared, offering the fragments of paper as proof. "Some people think a borrowed dress and a smile are enough to walk among us." Her words struck the air with the weight of judgment. Emily pressed the pieces of her ticket together, steadying her breath. Her heart thundered, but she willed her hands not to shake. "This doesn't define me," she whispered under her breath, though no one heard except perhaps the marble at her feet. Preston Ashford had already raised his phone high, holding it as though he were a reporter at a prize fight. "Look at this, folks," he said, grinning at his screen. "Peak delusion. She thinks she belongs here. Can you believe it?" His voice carried, and though he spoke to his followers, everyone nearby understood the cruelty. Laughter crackled across his live stream as comments scrolled in a blur. Camila wasn't far behind. With perfect lighting caught in the chandeliers above, she smiled into her camera. "This is painful," she whispered to her audience of thousands. "A Target dress at a $10,000 gala? I can't even—" She turned the camera back toward Emily, her followers flooding her feed with hearts, emojis, and mocking words. Within minutes, her numbers doubled. The laughter spread, nervous at first, then stronger. Guests leaned into one another, whispering observations, small jokes, cruel judgments. A man near the buffet smirked, saying, "She must have slipped past the guards," his companion replied. "Or maybe she thought this was some high school dance." The remarks floated on the air like smoke. Emily knelt once more, her black dress brushing the marble, gathering each fragment carefully. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were piecing together something far more precious than paper. Her hair slipped over her face, a shield against the staring eyes. The crowd expected tears, perhaps even anger, but Emily gave them neither. At the edge of the gathering, Judge Catherine Morrison narrowed her eyes. Silver hair pulled back neatly, she leaned toward her husband, Charles. "This isn't right," she whispered. He nodded, lifting his phone not to join the mockery but to record quietly, capturing every cruel word. A few steps away, Dr. Sarah Washington folded her arms, her mouth set in a line. "It's unnecessary cruelty," she said, her tone low but firm. Yet the Ashfords pressed forward. Victoria's smile widened, enjoying the spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "sometimes a gala attracts unexpected guests. But don't worry, security will see to it." Her tone was syrupy, but beneath it lay disdain sharp enough to wound. A ripple of chuckles followed, some clapping softly as though this were theater staged for their amusement. Emily stood again, the fragments clutched tightly in her palm. Her breath shook, but her back remained straight. Around her, phones glowed, recording every angle, every second of her humiliation. Preston whispered into his camera. Reality hitting hard, guys. Poor girl. He zoomed closer, eager for the likes that poured in. Camila giggled for her viewers. Second-hand embarrassment is killing me right now, she confessed, relishing the performance. Her follower count ticked upward with each passing moment. But not everyone laughed. A woman in emerald sequins whispered to her companion, "This feels wrong." A man in a dark suit shifted uneasily, setting his drink aside. The cruelty had soured the taste of champagne. A small cluster of guests exchanged uneasy glances, but they said nothing. Emily closed her eyes briefly, searching for her mother's voice. "Walk tall, Emily. You belong anywhere dignity leads you." She opened them again and met Victoria's gaze. Her hands trembled, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength that unsettled even those eager to mock. The jazz quartet continued, oblivious, their notes floating above the tension. Waiters moved hesitantly, unsure whether to serve or retreat. One offered a tray of sparkling water to a pair of guests, receiving a polite smile, and a $10 bill slipped discreetly into his hand. The small ritual of tipping, so natural to the wealthy, seemed almost absurd against the cruelty playing out at the center of the room. Preston turned his phone to capture Emily's face once more. "Look at that expression," he said. "She's realizing reality now. Painful, huh?" His followers laughed and jeered in the comments, though a few typed messages of discomfort. Camila ignored those, focusing on the adoring hearts streaming across her screen. Emily drew in another steady breath, grounding herself. She would not cry, not here. She would not give them that victory. But then, her clutch vibrated. Once. Twice. A persistent buzz. She slipped her hand inside, drawing out the phone. The glow lit her face as she glanced at the screen. One word flashed clearly. "Dad." Gasps rippled through those close enough to glimpse it. Some assumed it was staged. Others rolled their eyes, muttering about theatrics. But Emily stared at the screen, her thumb hovering. Her chest ached with conflicting emotions, anger, longing, fear, hope. For years, she had been without him. And now, in the moment she needed him least, his name appeared. She pressed decline. Victoria's laughter rang out. Even her phone calls are disruptive, embarrassing for everyone. She gestured dismissively, her jewels glittering. Guests chuckled again, though the sound was thinner now, less confident. Judge Morrison's husband kept recording, his jaw tight. "This isn't just unkind," he murmured. "It's cruel." Morrison placed her hand over his, her eyes never leaving Emily. Dr. Washington leaned closer to her husband. "This young woman hasn't caused a scene. They've created one around her." He nodded, silent agreement in his eyes. Emily slipped the phone back into her clutch, her hands tightening around it. The marble beneath her feet felt cold, grounding her. She whispered so softly that only she could hear. "Why now, Dad? After all these years?" The crowd shifted again, restless. For some, the fun was souring. For others, the spectacle remained irresistible. Phones still hovered, capturing every moment, ensuring nothing would be forgotten. Emily's phone buzzed again, the glow spilling faintly through the fabric of her clutch. Preston leaned eagerly into his stream. "Oh, this is too good," he told his followers. "Even her dad doesn't want to deal with her." The crowd laughed, though the sound rang hollow. Emily lowered her gaze, breathing slowly. She would endure this, as she had endured so many other things. The marble hall might swallow her dignity, but she refused to surrender it. Emily's phone buzzed in her clutch screen, flashing one word: Dad. 17 missed calls. One name glowed again and again on the cracked phone screen. Dad. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears as she stared down at the buzzing device clutched in her trembling hands. Around her, the laughter of the Ashfords cut sharper than glass. Their phones raised like weapons, recording her humiliation for the world to consume. She pressed the decline button with a shaky thumb, her chest tight with shame. She couldn't answer, not now, not in front of them. Victoria's voice sliced through the murmur of the crowd. "Even her calls are disruptive," she sneered, gesturing with manicured hands. "This is precisely what I mean about civilized behavior. Some people just don't belong in these spaces." Her words, dripping with disdain, echoed across the marble, feeding the snickers and cruel whispers of onlookers. The museum's director, Dr. Harper, stood stiff, her tablet clutched to her chest. She glanced from Emily's pale face to the list of donors glowing on her screen. The Williams Foundation sat plainly in the platinum tier, an undeniable fact. But the Ashfords' dominance in this hall was undeniable too, their millions tied to the very walls around her. Harper's voice faltered as she tried to speak. "Miss, perhaps we can step aside. Discuss this in my office." "No," Victoria interrupted, her tone loud enough to silence the room. "This charade has gone on long enough. Transparency is the only way to maintain standards." She gestured dramatically, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Look at her dress from Target, shoes from Payless. And she dares stand in a $10,000 a plate gala? Ridiculous." The circle tightened, tuxedos and gowns pressing closer. Dozens of phone cameras blinked like predator eyes. Emily swallowed hard, clutching the torn pieces of her invitation. For a moment she thought her knees might buckle. But she forced herself upright. She would not give them tears, not here. From the corner, Judge Morrison's husband recorded quietly, his brows furrowed deeper with every cruel word. "Nearby, Doctor." Washington shifted uncomfortably, her husband whispering, "Sarah, should we intervene?" She shook her head in dismay. "How? They've surrounded her like a pack." Preston lifted his phone higher, narrating smugly to his growing TikTok audience. "Peak delusion right here, folks. Watch how fast reality crushes the dream." His grin faltered only when his livestream comments began shifting. "This is too much. Why won't security help her? This feels wrong." Camila, ever eager for attention, spun slowly, capturing the crowd with her Instagram live. Her follower count ticked upward in real time. "Cringe content in the wild," she whispered into the mic. Girl really thought she belonged. The cruel smile on her lips faltered slightly as she noticed the growing discomfort in some of her viewers' comments. Emily's phone buzzed again. Another call. The screen glowed. "Dad, emergency. Answer now." She pressed decline, her hand trembling. Gasps rippled from those close enough to see the caller ID. Murmurs spread. "Dad? Who's Dad? Why does she keep ignoring it?" Victoria pounced. "Even her fake emergencies are disruptive. This is exactly what happens when we allow anyone in." Her voice swelled, self-righteous, feeding the mob's energy. Dr. Harper's nerves frayed. She checked her watch. 8:55 p.m. The auction was minutes away, but the room's attention was glued to this cruel spectacle. She whispered to the head of security, Patterson, "We need to resolve this quietly." But Patterson only looked at Emily with pity, his training torn between protocol and the dominance of the Ashfords. "Miss," he said hesitantly, "I'll need to escort you outside." A hush fell. Emily's chest tightened, her throat raw with unshed tears. She lifted her chin, voice steadier than she felt. "Before you remove me," she said softly, "maybe you should ask why my father keeps calling." The words landed like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread fast. A few in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Washington frowned. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Preston's livestream comments exploded. "Wait, why's her dad calling nonstop? This just got interesting. Don't end the stream." Richard Ashford checked his buzzing phone, irritation flashing across his face. Another call from his business partner's office. He silenced it quickly, unwilling to show weakness. Victoria rolled her eyes, forcing a laugh. "Please, if her father was anyone worth knowing, we'd already know him. Just another excuse." Emily's phone rang again, the sound echoing in the tense silence. With trembling fingers, she pressed "Answer." She raised it to her ear, her voice carrying across the marble hall. "Hi, Dad. Yes, I'm still here. At the museum." Every whisper still. 200 guests, strained to hear. The chandeliers seemed to hum with anticipation. Emily's gaze swept the Ashfords as she spoke, her voice calm despite the tears pricking her eyes. "I think you should know how the Ashfords treat people when they think no one important is watching." Dr. Harper's face drained of color. Her trembling fingers flew across her tablet, scrolling donor records. The name Carter Foundation flashed in bold letters. Her lips parted in horror. "Oh my God," she whispered, almost inaudible. "Michael Carter. Preston's phone shook in his hands as his livestream audience exploded.
Michael Carter? The Michael Carter? The billionaire? She's his daughter?
Richard's face turned ghostly pale. His voice cracked in a whisper. No, the deal, the partnership. Camila's livestream comment feed descended into chaos. This is over. They're done. She's his daughter? Best plot twist ever. Gasps rippled through the hall. Guests checked their phones, news headlines already updating in real time. The very walls of the museum seemed to hold their breath. And then, the heavy doors of the museum opened with a thunderous echo. Every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-syllable. And there, framed by marble and silence, Michael Carter walked in. Emily lifted the phone to her ear, the glow casting her face in pale light as silence fell across the marble hall. Conversations that had been lively only moments earlier hushed into a tense expectancy. Even the quartet's music faltered as the musicians glanced nervously toward the commotion. Every phone pointed at her seemed to lean in closer, capturing her next breath. Hello? Her voice was soft, but the sound carried, amplified by the silence. On the other end, a man's voice came strong, commanding, unmistakably familiar to many of the guests. Emily? Are you safe? What is happening there? The voice of Michael Carter, the billionaire whose name alone could open or close fortunes. Gasps scattered across the crowd. Heads whipped around as guests whispered his name. Richard Ashford's phone slipped in his hand, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He knew that voice. He had expected to hear it tomorrow morning across a conference table, not tonight through the phone of the girl his family had just mocked. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her chest tightening. She could hear the strain in his voice, urgency, and something else she couldn't name. Dad, she said, the word trembling on her lips. They tore my invitation. They told me I don't belong here. Every phone camera caught the words. Preston's hand shook as his live stream exploded with comments. Dad? Did she say Dad? Camila's feed froze for a moment as her own shock showed on her face before she quickly spun the camera back to herself, whispering nervously to her audience. This can't be real. Michael's voice was sharp now, clipped. Who? Who said this to you? Emily's eyes opened, calm, though her hand shook. She turned her gaze deliberately toward the Ashford family, her voice clear enough for all to hear. Victoria. Richard. Preston. Camila. They called me trash. They said I should be thrown out before I embarrassed everyone. A collective gasp rose. The hall seemed to sway with the weight of realization. The Ashfords stood frozen, their glittering confidence drained. Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. Dr. Sarah Washington shook her head, her voice carrying across the room. I knew this was wrong. Judge Morrison's husband stopped recording long enough to whisper. This is evidence, every second of it. Richard stepped forward at last, his face pale. Now wait, this is some misunderstanding. We didn't know. But Emily cut him off, her voice steady, almost serene. You didn't care to know. The words pierced deeper than any accusation. The hall buzzed again with whispers. Guests fumbling for their own phones to search, to confirm, to cross-check the names and the voice they had just heard. Within moments, social media lit with fragments, screenshots, hashtags, snippets of live streams spreading faster than anyone could contain. On the line, Michael's tone softened, but his authority was undiminished. Emily, listen to me. I'm 3 minutes away. Stay exactly where you are. You've done nothing wrong. Tears pricked Emily's eyes at the words she had longed to hear her entire life. You've done nothing wrong. Victoria found her voice at last, brittle and shaking. Mr. Carter, we had no idea. Enough. Michael's voice thundered through the phone, audible to everyone straining to hear. You will answer for this when I arrive. Preston's live stream caught the reaction of the crowd in real time. His followers, once laughing, now flooded the feed with exclamations. She's his daughter. Ashfords are finished. This is history in the making. His own face betrayed his fear, pale and shaken as the weight of his family's arrogance settled on him. Camila ended her live abruptly, but too late tens of thousands had already seen, recorded, and shared. Screenshots scattered across feeds like confetti, ensuring the moment would never be erased. Emily lowered the phone, her hands trembling but her chin high. She looked out at the sea of faces, some ashamed, some fascinated, some stunned. For the first time that night, she did not feel small, Judge Morrison stepped forward again, her voice measured but firm. This young woman deserves dignity. Tonight we've all seen what happens when prejudice replaces decency. Her words hung in the air, a quiet judgment heavier than any gavel. Richard tried again, his voice cracking. "Emily, please, we didn't know who you were." Her reply was calm, devastating in its simplicity. "You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to know that I am human." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the musicians had set their instruments aside, watching the unfolding reckoning. A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd, shame settling on shoulders once proud. Emily's phone buzzed again in her hand. This time it was a text, visible to those nearby. "I'm at the door. Stay strong." The guests closest to the entrance turned instinctively. The towering double doors at the far end of the hall loomed, heavy and silent, as if holding back a tide. The air thickened, anticipation humming like electricity before a storm. Every head turned, every phone lifted once more. The museum doors opened with a heavy echo. Michael Carter had arrived. The heavy doors closed behind him, with a boom that silenced even the last whisper. Michael Carter stood framed by the museum's arching doorway, the kind of presence that bent a room without a single word. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark Tom Ford suit, his silver-streaked hair neat, his eyes sharp and restless. Two assistants flanked him, one clutching a leather folio, the other already typing frantically on a tablet. Yet it was not his entourage, nor his wealth, that made the hall pause. It was the unmistakable aura of power, a man who could change destinies with a nod. For a moment, nobody moved. The crowd held its collective breath, as though the air itself feared to stir. Michael's gaze swept the hall, past the marble pillars, past the crowd of glittering gowns and black tuxedos, until it stopped. Emily, his daughter, standing alone in the circle of humiliation, her torn invitation still clutched in her hand. The edges of his stern expression softened, just slightly. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying with ease across the cavernous room. It was not the voice of a billionaire addressing shareholders. It was the voice of a father seeing what should never have happened. "Are you all right?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. For all her composure, for all the strength she had summoned, that single question pierced her. No one had asked her that all evening. She nodded slowly, fighting the tremor in her chin. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the word trembled. The crowd rustled as though it too exhaled. Phones shifted to capture both of them in one frame, the titan of industry and the girl they had called trash. Victoria Ashford was the first to recover. She stepped forward, diamonds flashing under the chandelier. "Mr. Carter, please," she began, her voice falsely smooth. "This is all a misunderstanding. We didn't know she was—" Michael raised a hand, and the words froze in her throat. His gaze was ice. "You didn't need to know who she was," he said, his voice low, but echoing Emily's earlier declaration. "You only needed to see how you treated her." Murmurs rippled. Some guests lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others continued filming, eager to capture every syllable. Richard finally moved, his phone buzzing uselessly in his pocket. His skin was pale, his jaw tight. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile, "surely we can discuss this privately. Our partnership—" Michael turned sharply. "Your partnership," he said, "was with a man who believed you could be trusted. After what I've just witnessed, I wonder if I misjudged everything." Gasps erupted. Richard's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "It was my family," he stammered. "They didn't know." Michael's voice rose, sharper. "They didn't need to know." The repetition hammered through the hall, a gavel in a courtroom. "My daughter stood here alone, surrounded by cameras and ridicule. And you," he swept his gaze across the Ashfords, "you made her humiliation your entertainment." Emily's hand shook as she held the torn paper tighter. The crowd saw it, the fragility of her gesture, yet also the strength behind it. Dr. Sarah Washington stepped forward again, her professional voice calm but firm. "Mr. Carter, I witnessed everything. Your daughter carried herself with dignity. What was done to her was cruel and deliberate," Judge Morrison added. "And I can attest legally, this was discrimination played out in front of 200 witnesses." Preston's live stream continued running, his viewers climbing into 6 digits. His own face was ghostly pale as comments flooded. You're finished. Ashford's destroyed. He's her dad. This is over. Michael approached Emily at last, each step deliberate. He extended his hand. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Years of absence weighed heavy. But then she placed her trembling hand into his. Their fingers closed, and a murmur of awe rippled through the room. He turned with her, still at his side, facing the crowd. "This is my daughter," he declared, his voice steady. "Emily Carter. She belongs wherever she chooses to stand." Phones lit up like stars. The images would be everywhere within minutes. Victoria's lips quivered. "Mr. Carter, we meant no." "Enough," he cut in. He reached into his jacket, drawing out his own phone. His assistant leaned close, whispering, "The Ashford contract tomorrow." Michael shook his head. Into the phone, he spoke clearly, putting the call on speaker for all to hear. "This is Michael Carter. Terminate discussions with Ashford Industries immediately. Effective tonight." Gasps rolled through the marble hall. Richard stumbled forward, his voice desperate. "Michael, please, our employees, our stockholders, this deal is critical." Michael's voice was iron. "You should have thought about that before you taught your children cruelty instead of compassion." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. Her father had chosen. Not business, not pride. Her. The crowd buzzed with a new electricity, half shock, half awe. Guests whispered furiously, some already typing messages, others filming in disbelief. Preston finally lowered his phone. But the damage was irreversible. Tens of thousands had seen the live broadcast already, many recording every frame. Richard pressed forward again, his voice hoarse. "Michael, don't do this. We can apologize. We can make this right." Michael tightened his grip on Emily's hand, raising it slightly. "You will make it right," he said, his tone unyielding. "But not with me, not with a contract, with her, Em." Every lens in the room captured the moment. The billionaire father choosing his daughter over a $750 million partnership. The Marble Hall, once an arena of humiliation, had become a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. Gasps echoed through the Marble Hall as phones captured the moment. Michael Carter choosing family over fortune. The echo of Michael Carter's words lingered in the Marble Hall like thunder after a lightning strike. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing against every shoulder, every jeweled neckline, every polished shoe. 200 people who had come to sip champagne and trade smiles were now witnesses to a reckoning no one had expected. Richard Ashford's skin glistened with sweat. He clutched his phone with trembling fingers, refreshing his messages as if the screen could offer an escape route. Instead, it delivered a flood of panic. Stock alerts predicting immediate collapse, emails from board members demanding an explanation, news notifications already carrying headlines. Carter breaks ties with Ashford's after gala incident. His company, the empire he had built on polished deals and polished lies, was unraveling faster than he could catch it. Victoria stood frozen beside him. Her red gown shimmered under the chandeliers, but no amount of silk or diamonds could mask the tremor in her hands. She lifted her chin, searching for the voice that had always commanded admiration. "Mr. Carter?" she began, her tone brittle. "Surely we can—" Michael's eyes snapped to her, and the words died in her throat. His presence alone silenced her, his gaze colder than the marble floor beneath them. "You mocked her," he said evenly, his voice cutting sharper than any shout. "You destroyed her invitation and called her trash. In front of 200 witnesses, you made my daughter a spectacle for your entertainment. There will be no negotiation." The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers darting between guests like startled birds. Phones continued to rise, each one a mirror capturing the family's downfall. Preston shuffled his feet, his phone still glowing in his hand. His live stream had ended, but the aftermath was impossible to escape. Notifications continued to flash across his screen. Angry emojis, furious comments, even death threats. His once loyal followers had turned. He tried to laugh, the nervous kind of chuckle that had always bought him time. "It was just content," he muttered, his voice cracking. "Just a joke." Michael's glare pinned him. "Do you believe her dignity is a joke? That mocking her pain is entertainment?" Preston swallowed hard, but no words came. His fingers trembled against his phone, unable to find refuge in the device that had just betrayed him. Camila, pale and wide-eyed, clutched her phone to her chest. Her followers, once her pride, had begun abandoning her by the thousands. Brands she represented had already released statements distancing themselves. Her reputation was collapsing in real time. She tried to speak, her voice thin and desperate. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know she was your daughter." Michael's voice was ice. "And if she hadn't been, would that have excused you? Would that have made your cruelty acceptable?" Camila's lips parted, but the silence that followed was answer enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks, though the crowd no longer sympathized. To them, her sorrow smelled of consequence, not remorse. Emily stood still at her father's side, torn invitation pieces clenched in her fist. She felt his hand close over hers, steady and strong. For years she had wondered what it would be like to have him present. Tonight, she realized it was not his wealth, not his fame, but his choice that mattered. He had chosen her over a fortune. That truth steadied her trembling legs. Richard stepped forward again, his voice hoarse, desperation bleeding through every syllable. "Michael, please, don't do this. Think of the thousands of employees at Ashford Industries, families who depend on us. If you end the partnership, they'll suffer." Michael turned slowly, his gaze leveled with Richard's calm. His words were calm, deliberate. "You should have thought of those families before you taught your children that cruelty was acceptable. Leadership is not measured by profits. It's measured by the values you choose to live by." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Judge Morrison stepped forward, her voice firm. "I will testify to what I saw tonight. This was discrimination, deliberate and public." Her husband lifted his phone. "I recorded everything from the first insult to this moment." Dr. Sarah Washington added her voice, sharp with conviction. "As a doctor, I have seen lives ruined by prejudice. Tonight I saw the same poison on display, and I will not remain silent about it." The Ashfords recoiled, surrounded not by admiration but by condemnation. The crowd that had once applauded their wealth now leaned forward with disdain, recording every crack in their composure. Victoria's diamonds caught the light as she clutched her necklace, her mask of arrogance faltering. She whispered to her husband, "Richard, fix this. Say something." But Richard's words had dried up. He saw clearly now what Michael's rejection meant. Investors pulling out, creditors circling, reporters sharpening their pens. The deal with Carter had been their last salvation, and it was gone. Emily looked at him, her gaze steady. "This was all I had," she said softly, opening her palm to show the shredded invitation. "And you destroyed it." Michael took the fragments gently, his jaw tightening. He raised them high for the crowd to see. This is what they thought of dignity. This is what pride without compassion creates. His voice rose, resonant, filling the marble hall. Let the record show that tonight the Ashford family's pride cost them everything. Gasps followed, then silence. The chandeliers glittered coldly overhead, as if reflecting the weight of the moment. Phones captured every angle, every tear, every tremor. On social media, the story raced ahead, hashtags trending, live streams clipping the moment into endless loops. News anchors interrupted broadcasts to report the humiliation in real time. Within minutes, the Ashfords were no longer a family of wealth, but a family of disgrace. Victoria's voice broke at last, trembling. "Richard, what have we done?" For once, her husband had no answer. The orchestra remained silent. The waiters stood frozen, unsure if they should continue pouring champagne into crystal glasses. Even the marble walls seemed to echo judgment. Emily leaned into her father's side, her voice low but sure. "They wanted to make me invisible, but everyone sees now." Michael placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said softly, though the entire hall heard. "Everyone sees now." The Ashfords realized too late the world was no longer watching their wealth, but their downfall. The marble hall of the museum had been left behind, but its echoes followed Emily into the cool night air. Hours later, when the limousines had disappeared and the gala's glamour dissolved into silence, she sat at a small cafe table in Brooklyn, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The diner was quiet at this hour, the kind of place where the air smelled of coffee grounds and fried eggs, where tired waitresses moved slowly and regulars nodded at one another like old friends. Michael Carter sat across from her, the same man whose name had shaken the gala, yet here he looked less like a billionaire and more like a weary father. His tie was loosened, his jacket draped carelessly over the back of his chair. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the rhythm of the old ceiling fan filled the pauses between their words. Emily had chosen this place deliberately. It wasn't Fifth Avenue. It wasn't marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of diner her mother used to take her to after school, when they had just enough money for pie, but not for dinner. It was real. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled into a bun, poured their coffee and offered a smile. "On the house," she said gently, recognizing them both from the news already flooding every screen. "You've had quite a night." Michael murmured his thanks. Emily just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the mug like a clock, marking the seconds of silence. Finally, Michael spoke. His voice was quieter now, stripped of authority. "I should have been there, Emily. Not just tonight. Always." She lifted her eyes, meeting his. For the first time, she saw not the giant the world feared, but a man with regret, heavy in his gaze. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady, though her fingers trembled against the mug. "Why call me 17 times tonight after years of nothing?" Michael exhaled, rubbing his temples as though the truth weighed more than billions. "Because I've spent years convincing myself that staying away was protecting you. That my world, with its greed and politics, would have poisoned yours. I thought I was shielding you from me." He swallowed hard. "But I wasn't protecting you, was I? I was protecting myself. From shame. From facing the fact that I had abandoned you." Emily's heart tightened. She remembered birthdays with an empty chair, school concerts with only her mother in the crowd, long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if he ever thought of her. "Do you know what it's like?" she whispered. "To see other kids run into their father's arms and wonder what's wrong with you that yours doesn't show up." His eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. "Yes, I know now. Because I saw you tonight standing alone, facing that cruelty, and I realized you were stronger without me than I ever was without you, and that is my greatest failure." The cafe door opened and closed behind late-night customers, the bell jingling softly. A man left a tip on the counter, and the waitress called after him, "Take care now." Life went on around them, ordinary and steady, in stark contrast to the chaos of hours earlier. Emily sipped her coffee, its bitterness grounding her. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him the years could not be erased with one night. Yet she also wanted to believe him, to believe that the man across from her was not only the powerful CEO, but the father she had needed. "People are calling you a hero," she said finally. "They're saying you destroyed a $750 million deal for me. But where were you when I needed you to destroy silence? When all I wanted was a phone call on my birthday?" Michael winced, the words cutting deeper than any headline. "You're right," he said softly. "Money can be remade. Deals can be rebuilt. But those moments, I can never give them back. All I can do is try, from this day forward, to be present, to be what I should have been all along. A father." Emily studied him. His hands, usually steady in boardrooms, now trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. His eyes, which had stared down competitors without flinching, now brimmed with vulnerability. For the first time, she saw him as more than the man on magazine covers. She saw him as broken, flawed, reaching. The waitress passed again, refilling their mugs. She lingered just a second longer, sensing the weight of the conversation. "You've got time," she said gently, her voice maternal. "Don't waste it." Emily turned her gaze to the window. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn were quiet, lit only by street lamps and the occasional passing car. She remembered walking these streets with her mother, holding her hand tightly. The memory filled her chest with both warmth and ache. "You can't erase what you missed," she said finally, her voice softer. "But maybe you can help me build what's ahead, not as Michael Carter, billionaire, as Dad." The word hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, but real. Michael's throat tightened. "If you let me," he said, his voice breaking. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was full of possibility, fragile but alive. Emily's eyes burned as she blinked back tears. She thought of the humiliation she had endured, the cruelty of strangers, the pride of the Ashfords collapsing. And then she thought of this, two people at a diner table, pie and coffee between them, trying to stitch years of brokenness into something new. She set her spoon down and looked at him fully. Her eyes filled, not with anger, but with something far more difficult, forgiveness waiting to be spoken. 6 months had passed since that night at the Metropolitan Museum. What once had been a hall of humiliation was now a place of reckoning and renewal. The chandeliers sparkled just as brightly. The marble floors shone just as white. But the spirit of the evening was different. There were fewer glittering gowns, fewer diamond necklaces, fewer people there only to be seen. Tonight was not about display, it was about commitment. A wide banner stretched across the hall. The Carter, Ashford Summit on Dignity and Family. Beneath it, rows of chairs filled quickly. Instead of champagne, servers passed out mugs of coffee and tea. Instead of whispered gossip, there was conversation earnest, thoughtful, sometimes awkward, but real. Emily stood near the stage, taking in the sight. She traced with her eyes the very spot where 6 months ago Victoria Ashford had torn her invitation. The memory was still there, sharp as glass, but it no longer crushed her. It had become the foundation for something larger. She touched the small silver bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother, and whispered inwardly, "We made it, Mom." Her father stepped to the podium. Michael Carter no longer looked like the distant giant whose name dominated business sections. His voice was steady but warm, his suit simple, his tone closer to a storyteller on a porch than a titan in a boardroom. 6 months ago, he began, we saw pride dressed as elegance and cruelty disguised as humor. My daughter stood alone in this hall, humiliated in front of hundreds. And yet she chose dignity. Tonight we gather to say, dignity will no longer stand alone. Applause rippled, not loud, but strong and sincere. In the front row sat the Ashfords. Their posture was entirely changed. Victoria wore a modest navy dress, her jewelry simple. Richard's tie was plain, his expression subdued. Preston and Camilla had their phones put away, not because they didn't have them, but because they had learned how to listen. Emily joined her father on stage. Her voice, once trembling, carried now with confidence. 6 months ago, I was told I didn't belong, that my presence was an embarrassment. But tonight proves something different. No one can erase our belonging. We carry it within us. And when we stand together, no circle of cruelty can push us out. She gestured toward the Ashfords. This family tried to destroy me, but they also chose to change. They could have hidden, denied, doubled down. Instead, they opened themselves to accountability. They began to listen. It doesn't erase what happened, but it shows what can happen when people decide not to protect their pride, but to heal their humanity. Murmurs of agreement filled the hall. Victoria rose slowly, her hands clasped in front of her. I tore that invitation, she admitted, her voice unsteady. I called Emily trash. I tried to strip her dignity in front of hundreds. I cannot undo those actions, but I can own them, and I can spend the rest of my life ensuring I never repeat them. She turned to Emily, her eyes wet. I am sorry. A hush filled the hall. This time, when phones lifted, it was not to mock, but to record something rare, contrition. Preston followed. I streamed Emily's pain for clicks, he confessed. I thought humiliation was entertainment. Now, I use my platform to expose privilege and to uplift voices I ignored. Last month, my video interviewing first-generation college students reached 2 million people. That's what I want my name tied to now. Camilla added softly, I mocked Emily online. I fueled cruelty. But I've rebuilt my channel. Today I share stories of women starting businesses, families rebuilding after hardship, communities finding strength. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Applause rose, stronger this time. Judge Morrison stood from her seat. As someone who witnessed that night, I can tell you, what began as cruelty has become a case study in accountability. This is not how most stories end, but it can be how many begin. Dr. Washington added, I watched Emily face hatred with grace. That taught me as much as any medical training. Tonight teaches me even more. Change is possible even for those who seemed least likely to change. Michael stepped forward again. This summit isn't about one family's humiliation. It's about what we choose to do after failure. We can let shame destroy us, or we can let accountability transform us. My daughter taught me that the measure of success is not wealth, but love, not pride, but forgiveness. He turned to Emily. "She gave me a second chance to be a father. I intend to honor it." Emily blinked through tears, then faced the crowd. "Forgiveness isn't easy. It's heavier than anger. But tonight, I choose it. Because forgiveness doesn't excuse the past, it builds the future." The hall erupted, not with glitter or gossip, but with genuine applause that echoed against the marble-like waves of hope. At the side of the stage, Victoria leaned toward Richard, whispering, "We'll spend our lives proving this wasn't just words." Richard nodded, squeezing her hand. For the first time in decades, humility softened his face. As the evening drew to a close, leaders from 47 companies signed pledges to implement accountability and inclusion policies inspired by the Carter-Ashford model. Community leaders shook hands. Strangers embraced. The Marble Hall, once an arena of humiliation, had become a house of healing. Emily stood by the doors at the end of the night, her father beside her. Guests filed past, some pausing to thank her, others to hug her. She felt tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came when something broken had been used to build. Her father leaned close, his voice soft enough only for her. "You turned the worst night of your life into the best lesson of mine. I'm proud of you." Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm proud of us." As the chandeliers dimmed and the hall emptied, the marble floor gleamed, no longer cold under her feet. It was solid ground, a foundation for what would come next. The night ended not with champagne, but with promises. And as Emily stepped into the cool New York night, her heart carried something stronger than anger, stronger than pain, hope born from forgiveness, and the certainty that family, once broken, could be rebuilt. Sometimes, the end of a story doesn't come with trumpets or applause, but with a quiet cup of coffee in a Brooklyn diner, or the soft hum of voices in a hall where cruelty once lived. 6 months after a night that could have destroyed her, Emily stood taller, her father by her side. And even those who had mocked her found themselves changed. And before I close this story, dear listeners, let me ask you gently, if you feel this story touched something true, type the number 1 in the comments. If you feel it missed the mark, or if you'd like to suggest something different, type 0. Your voice matters here, too. What we've traveled through together is not just a tale of wealth lost or deals broken. It is a story about second chances, about how even the hardest hearts can bend when confronted with the simple truth of family. At its core, it's about redemption, how love can repair what pride once shattered. You see, unconditional kindness really can change the course of a life. Every person deserves to be loved and to have a family. Human dignity is worth far more than money or status, and sometimes all it takes is one open door, one second chance for someone to shine. Happiness, as this story whispers, doesn't come when we live only for ourselves, it comes when we live for others. Perhaps this reminds you of something in your own life, maybe a Sunday dinner years ago, where 3 generations crowded around a table, laughter mixing with the smell of roast chicken and apple pie. Or maybe it was a quiet morning, sitting on a porch, swing with coffee, listening to birdsong, while remembering those who once sat there beside you. Life gives us countless small invitations to forgive, to reconnect, to begin again, and like a porch light left on for a loved one returning home late, even the smallest act of compassion can guide someone through their darkest night. The Ashfords were forced to face their pride, and Michael Carter was forced to face his absence. Yet, in the end, what endured was not the humiliation or the downfall, it was the choice to forgive, the choice to build again. Emily's strength showed the world that one person's dignity can become the seed of change for many. And in that, there is a lesson for us all. When we choose family over fortune, compassion over cruelty, forgiveness over resentment, we give the world something money cannot buy: hope. So, dear friends, as we bring this story to a close, take a moment to reflect. Who in your own life might be waiting for a word of forgiveness? Who might need to hear, even after many years, that they still belong? These are the questions that matter long after the headlines fade. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to share it, because sometimes a story passed from one hand to another becomes the lantern that lights the way for a whole community. And remember this, true legacies are not measured in fortunes gained or empires built. They are measured in the love we leave behind, the bridges we repair, and the families we choose to hold close. Like the quiet glow of a window light on a winter's evening, Forgiveness can warm the coldest night, and that light, once lit, can guide us all home.